John, you're wanting to wrap this up at the top of the hour. That would be 3 o'clock Eastern time, correct?
Okay, John, I think we'll go ahead and get started. It's a few minutes after. All right, well, hello and good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Dodds, and I am the President and Chief Operating Officer of Kencor Elevator Systems, which is an American elevator group company. I'm also the chair of the NAEC Member Services Committee, and I want to welcome everyone to this third quarter town hall discussion. The NAEC Town Hall Series has become a series of conversations with various leaders within the vertical transportation industry. In today's interchange, we'll expand our horizons as we look for expertise from outside of our industry on a topic that has been facing us all. All the past conversations have focused on topics that have been identified by NAEC members as critical and noteworthy ones for their business. The topics for the town hall sessions have been assembled from various sources, and the topics have ranged from immediate needs to longer-term objectives involving successfully supporting your businesses. As the Member Services Committee is eagerly looking for feedback on this series of events, so we would like to take a moment and put up a brief survey of topics that may be of interest to you. I'm going to ask the attendees to please take a moment and choose up to 3 of the topics presented that could be utilized in future town hall presentations. As a reminder, if you have any feedback in general, or if you have ideas about topics for future town hall events that are not included on this list in the poll, please reach out to trip@naec.org. I'd like to take a moment to thank Sean Madden for his continued help and support with the Town Hall Series initiative, and of course, Trip Cook with NAEC for all of his assistance as well. Outside of those individuals, also would like to especially thank John Toller for his involvement with today's session. Just going to pause for another moment or two to allow everyone to complete the poll. Today's topic is about the causes and consequences of the supply chain crises. Typically, our town hall sessions run for an hour and a half, but as we only have one featured speaker for today's session, It's likely that we will not utilize all this time, and our goal is to wrap up around 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. By now, the impacts of supply chain disruptions are becoming all too familiar. Increases in the prices of steel, one of our industry's key external drivers and main material inputs, increases in fuel prices, trucking and freight challenges, shortages, inflation, supply and demand volatility, and factory closures. If we were dealing with just one of these issues, it could wreak havoc on our businesses. But we are currently facing all of them at the same time. Our speaker will give us some insights into the macro and global dynamics at play, and hopefully insights as to what we can expect in the future from the supply chain that we depend on. And before I introduce our panelists, I want to provide a few updates on important upcoming NAEC activities. Our annual convention and exposition will be held in the city of Louisville, Kentucky, and it is less than a month away. The event will be held on September 18th through 21st, and we have over 1,200 attendance registrations currently, and over 150 exhibitors signed up a month out from the event. Complimentary passes to the expo are available for exhibitors to share with their clients and customers. We have a full agenda of presentations, panels, and extracurricular events planned, although one of our local tours has already sold out, and there are only a limited number of golf spots still available. To keep from missing out on these activities, be sure to register soon at the NAEC website, which is naec.org. In October, we'll be holding the next in our series of regional workshops, and this one will be held in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Like the others, this regional workshop will focus on accredited technical training and code compliance information. The same workshop will be offered on 2 days, with the same presentations being offered on both days. Each day offers 8 hours of continuing education credit that can be applied to state licensing, CEUs, and CET renewals. Lastly, as a reminder, we are in membership renewal season for the association. If you haven't yet renewed your membership, please do it today so that you can continue to take advantage of the association's benefits and events. And if you are an exhibitor at the trade show in Louisville, please make sure you are current with your dues before the big event arrives. With some of those organizational items out of the way, I'd like to move forward with our town hall event. When our presenter has finished his presentation, we'll ask some questions from the audience attendees. As you have questions, write them in the Q&A window. I will try to engage John as best as possible throughout the presentation with some of those questions, and we will circle back to as many of the ones that are unanswered as time allows at the end of the event. As always, we like to always try to be mindful of everyone's time, and we'll try to wrap up no later than 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Now to introduce our speaker, John Holztrager. John is the Director of Supply Chain Partnerships and an adjunct faculty member with Haslam College of Business at the University of Tennessee. He is an accomplished supply chain professional with expertise in total delivered cost reduction, operating asset strategy, supply chain transformation, and best-in-class supply chain results. John held senior roles with various regional, North American, and global supply chain operating groups. He has experience in pulp and paper, consumer disposables, consumer electronics, and electric utility sectors. The majority of his 35-year career was spent with Kimberly-Clark Corporation, Sony, and the Tennessee Valley Authority, which is the nation's largest public power provider. John now teaches supply chain operations with an emphasis on practical aspects of leading manufacturing, purchasing, distribution, and transportation teams. He also works closely with UT Supply Chain Forum members and other companies who are engaged in recruiting, organizational development, and operations improvement. John, it's great to see you. Great to have your expertise with us today. And thanks for taking the time to join us. So I will now turn the presentation over to you.
Great, thank you, John. The group should be able to see the lead slide, Global Supply Chain Crisis, Causes and Consequences. Can you see that? Okay, outstanding. I'm going to switch over to full screen mode then. Still look good?
We're good, thanks.
Hey, super. Thanks very much. Great to be with everyone this afternoon. I'll take questions as we go along, and John's going to be helping me with that. And if not, we can take them at the end. Long time ago, someone that I respected a lot said that every presentation has to have a front porch, and I had no idea what he meant. And he said, hey, front porches are the places where people stand to get out of the rain until you decide to let them in. And I still wasn't clear on what he said, so he just had to lay it out for me. He said, look, he said, you got to give your audience some idea of how he or she can relate to the business that these folks are in. And I'll tell you right now, I've not been in your business, but I've led very large facilities management organizations that rely on your products and services. And as a utility organization member with operating plants, needing elevators to keep production up, I became aware very quickly how important service levels were in elevators. And then I moved into the corporate offices and realized it's just as important in a high-rise office building, especially when you're in the same building as the CEO who needs to use the elevator. So that's my front porch. I do have an appreciation for your business, although I've never been in it. And I hope you'll let me in, and as I share some of these ideas with you. So a few slides about the University of Tennessee. We do a lot of supply chain work. We're the largest undergraduate major in the entire UT system statewide. We also have the largest graduate business program now on the UT Knoxville campus. We run the largest university-based network of top SCM companies, and I'll show you a slide on that in just a second. We were also this year rated the #1 graduate supply chain program in North America, the #2 undergraduate supply chain program in North America. And both of those are from the Gartner organization. So if you're on campus and you're not part of supply chain, you're sick of hearing about supply chain. You might guess that we're a research organization primarily. Our senior faculty is rated the #1 research faculty in supply chain globally. The only problem with that is supply chain research is really lengthy. There's hundreds of pages to read. And so for someone who is an executive in a busy role like you are, we've made this more digestible. And this library of white papers on a variety of supply chain topics are available to you at no cost. There will be a link to all of these at the end. But just to give you an idea, it's everything from what does digitization look like in the supply chain to, what are third-party best practices, either in transportation or distribution operations and everything in between. So that's something you could read in about an hour, share with your team, and level set your organization on what some of these practices mean in your shop. So this, you might say, is part of our customer base. We have a very large industry forum that runs twice a year with all of these companies you see listed on the right. Generally, Fortune 100 types, they meet with us twice a year. They provide feedback to us on what should our students look like, what should our research look like, how can we improve our programs. And a lot of the new programs that we're coming out with are a direct result of our connection to industry. If you're in medicine and you're a researcher, you have a laboratory. For us, our laboratory is industry. So this is a really good way for us to stay connected to industry. And I hear my dog whining behind me. I hope she's not going to make a scene. We're just going to keep going. So let's get right into our topic. All of us as consumers and also as business people have experienced that supply chains are just not living up to what we've come to expect over the last couple of decades. A lot of companies still think they're delivering a superior customer service experience, but we as customers and consumers are not sure we agree with that. And as all of us know as business people, our expectations haven't gone down any, and neither have consumers. First, let's talk about what is a supply chain and what's it designed to do. At the University of Tennessee, all we teach is integrated end-to-end global supply chains. What do I mean by that? We believe supply chains start with demand. They start with the customer. So way over on the left, you need to set up your supply chain with the idea that you're going to have to meet demand at the end of the supply chain. So if we start with materials, raw materials, in your case, steel is a big one, electronic components are big ones too. That has to move all the way through procurement and inbound logistics, and that has to be integrated with a manufacturing operation or a service operation, fulfill those orders. It has to go to outbound logistics. And then you have to face a customer in the end and deliver their needs. So all of these things are connected. Physically, there are material flows from left to right and sometimes back to the left again. But there's also information management that's very connected and that runs through all of these nodes in any supply chain. And of course, financial metrics override all this. And so there are P&L and there are balance sheet transactions going on every time one of these movements takes place. This is kind of a messy diagram, but I think it's really a good way to talk about what the impact is of one broken node or broken link in the supply chains that we're all part of. So if your company is in the center in the orange block, if you go left, you have multiple tiers of suppliers that feed into your company. You've got primary suppliers in that first row that you buy directly from, and then there's secondary and tertiary suppliers. Maybe a way to think about this is somebody way over on the left is making an integrated circuit that goes into a board that you need, that goes into a module, that goes into an elevator. And so any disruption in any of those nodes or links is going to impact you as the focal company. And then downstream going to the right, those same disruptions, of course, can occur going right, and that's going to impact what your customer sees in terms of the service that they get from you. So right now, my guess is that many of you are still in disruption mode very much. And if you go over to the left, there are raw materials, that have been disrupted as a result of the pandemic. And that's also, of course, going to impact and cause disruptions in manufacturing as well. My guess is you're buying a lot of materials out of Asia. So origin ports are rolling bookings or discontinuing those sailings completely. So that's going to cause another disruption. That will cause another downstream problem with transshipments. At the ramps going outbound, and by the time you get down to cross-dock, transload, or the DCs here in the US, you've already been impacted a number of times. And it wouldn't surprise me at all to see that you folks are seeing probably 4, 12, 26-week delays on what would normally be a couple of week process. If you keep moving right, you get down to retail and consumer, and that's a little bit out of your scope, but the same thing, of course, is occurring as you continue to move right in the supply chain. John, I'm going to take a breath for just a moment here and see if there's any questions out there or comments.
I have not had any come in yet, John. Just a reminder to our audience, this is going to be slightly different than some of our town halls in the past. John's willing to take questions as we go. So if you do have any, send them to me and I'll make sure I get them to John as quickly as possible. Thanks, John.
Great. Thank you, John. The only question I won't take is, what are the Tennessee Volunteers going to do in football this year? Because, it's always a rebuilding year on Rocky Top. So let's talk about what's happened to us over the last couple of years. What were some of the precursors, causes, what was some of the collateral damage along the way, and what's next? So if we think back to pre-March of 2020, there were some seeds in the ground already that were waiting to sprout and cause us problems. And certainly overdependence on China and other places in Asia too was something that was in existence then. And those lengthening of supply chains as manufacturing more and more went towards Asia and towards China. I think the other thing that we had done for many years as businesses was we focused on efficiency at the cost of resiliency and agility and the ability to respond quickly, because we had locked ourselves into one or maybe two, or in some cases only 3 suppliers of similar components. And the more we focused on leveraging cost, the less we had the ability to move left and right as we needed to, certainly during the pandemic. Even 2.5 years ago, we were seeing spot shortages in the labor force, and there were clearly issues with immigration in many countries, not just our own. But I think the biggest problem we had going back decades was just poor driver availability. And that's certainly true in motor freight in the United States, but almost any mode that you choose to use, whether it's ocean, air, intermodal, you always have to have a driver in motor freight mode, because somebody's got to do the dray from the port or to the port. And even on air freight, there's got to be a driver bringing that product to your shop. So that hasn't improved, and in fact has gotten worse. I think risk management's another thing that we as business people really kind of pencil whipped. We would say, okay, we're going to have a risk management review today, and maybe we do it over a lunch and learn, and we pull out a 3-ring binder and pronounce, yea, verily, we've managed our risk. And we really just didn't think deeply enough about it. And that really came back to bite us. And then this big e-commerce shift, and that's a theme that will keep coming up as we go through the next few slides. I mean, we shifted from a lot of bricks and mortar to e-commerce, and that caused a lot of problems as well. So then, you condition everyone with this Alibaba or Amazon effect, where you just expect to get it in 3 days, and then maybe you expect it in 2 days, and now Amazon's working on sub 1 day deliveries. That really caused you to lose sight of what does it take to move something around the world to you in a timely fashion. So we throw in the pandemic, and we get this massive cause of imbalance, because we've had this shift now from services to goods. 2.5 years ago, remember, everybody's hunkered down, sitting at home, nobody's doing much of anything. And so what we can still do is order goods. We may not be able to go out to a restaurant or to a movie, but we can sit at home and order goods. And so Amazon and Walmart, they kept cranking on their supply chain, and we kept moving product around the world. At the same time, we had all these supply constraints, and then we had impacts to labor that everyone saw. Of course, there's absence directly due to illness. Somebody might not have been sick, but they might have been out of the workforce because they were providing child or elder care. And then we had the great retirement added on top of that. So all that together causes this huge disruption in what is an otherwise pretty good running supply chain. The Wall Street Journal put together a 1-hour video, which I'm not going to show you, but the title of it is Why Global Supply Chains May Never Be the Same. I clipped a 1-minute portion out of this that I will show you, and has a bit of a consumer feel to it, but the same is certainly true in your space as well. So let's just watch this real quick, and then I'll jump back in. There's probably going to be a commercial here too. Sorry for that.
They get you in
What do you know?
trip or dinner, or sometimes just a Visa gift
Hey,
card.
John, we're not seeing the video.
Everyone has had the
Not-
experience of not being able to get something, and everyone has had the experience of paying more.
The changing world order. The times ahead will be
All right,
radically
John, let me
different
kill it.
from
Hang on
those
just a
that we've
second.
experienced in our lifetimes, though similar to many times before. How do I know that? Because they always have been. Over my
Sorry,
roughly
John, I'm
50
gonna have to
years
kill this another
of
way.
You're all right.
economic investing, I've learned the hard way that the most
Hang on
important
a sec.
events that surprised me did so because they never happened in my lifetime. These painful surprises led me to study the last 500 years of history for similar situations, where I saw that they had indeed happened many times before, with the ups and the downs.
John, can you still hear me?
Yep.
And U.S. empire.
John, can you still hear me?
Yep.
And every
Okay,
time
I'm still
they
trying to
did,
kill it. I
it was a
apologize.
sign
You're
of the
okay.
changing world. This study taught me valuable lessons that I'm going to pass along to you here in a distilled form. You can find the comprehensive version in my book, Principles for Dealing with the Changing World Order. Let me begin with a story.
All right. We're going to put this all back together. Okay, John, can you see the slide again?
Yeah, we see your slideshow.
Okay. All right, we'll go back to where we were. Apologize for that. Okay, can you see the global ranking?
We're good.
All right. Sorry for that, folks. Since we are in university land, I think it's only fair that we have a quiz. So what you're seeing on the right is a ranking of global port performance, and this captures capacity and cost and service and all kinds of characteristics. And Yokohama's sitting on top of the score for all of the ports of the world. So the quiz question is, how far down the list do you have to go to find a US port? Would you have to go to number 50, 100, 200, 300? What do you think? So unfortunately, you have to go down to 328 to find Los Angeles or 337, depending upon the approach that you take. And that doesn't speak well of our ability to handle the capacity that's coming our way. We have for years underperformed the rest of the world, and we haven't kept pace with either our productivity in terms of people productivity or in terms of what we do to capitalize those ports. So just to give you some perspective, when you see all those ships floating at anchor in the photographs on the evening news, one of the contributing factors is we haven't kept pace. Not to say that people aren't working hard. There are folks out there doing the best we can, but we're certainly not close to top performing when it comes to global port operations. So the other thing we saw as a consequence of this imbalance between services and goods were these long initial delays because we kept shutting down not only ports, but also factories in the East, which caused these shortages that we saw in spot and in total, and then cascading shortages that extended on through the supply chain to the components and modules that your business might have needed. We saw a lot of mismatches in capacity. We saw some under and over utilization. We saw a lot of hoarding, substitution, certainly on the consumer side, but also on the commercial side as well. Price spikes, inflation, which continues today. Labor, as all of you know, is always a wild card in these situations. The longshoremen appear to be wrapping up a West Coast contract. The last I saw was a few weeks ago that it wasn't quite done, but it didn't look like there was going to be a strike. So that's certainly good news. Starbucks has started to see unionization, as has Amazon. I noticed a few weeks ago, South Korean truckers were about to go on strike. Government, of course, can be a wild card as well. And so we're not always sure what a Republican or a Democrat administration might do. And I think everyone's seeing general staffing challenges in both skilled trades and professional trades as well. So this data that I'm showing you is always going to be several weeks or months old, but we've seen a lot of energy spiking this year. Diesel went up, it's probably back down since you've seen this chart. That's one of the major input costs that we have in all of our operations. There is a little bit of good news if you look at some of the freight indexes. There's two here. One is China to North America East Coast. The other is China to North America West Coast. You see that it's come down as of May from the highs in September. This isn't really an average, and it's not trying to capture a specific cost from port to port. But it's a bit of good news in the sense that we've come down off some of the spikes that we've seen in the recent past. Port congestion is a little better. There's some specific port information there you can see that's a little bit dated, but an enormous number of our containers come in through a very few ports in North America, 6 or 7 ports. So it's no wonder we see congestion when we've got that much cubic volume coming ashore. So we also had some collateral damage, and I think there's also some opportunities coming out of this. I mean, inflation certainly has stuck around longer and is more intense than we anticipated. We've seen this shift in housing demand linked to labor disruption, and it's kind of a new normal on what does work look like. And a lot of companies are still trying to answer the question, do people work at home? Do they work in the office? What does that look like? And work is changing in the way it gets done as well. Some areas that we will certainly need to improve our business focus on. One is risk management and planning. It's going to have to be a lot more granular, a lot more thoughtful. Supplier management, instead of just looking at your tier 1 supplier, we now as business people have to start looking at tier 2 and what tier 3 is doing and how well are they forecasting and managing their demand and their deliveries, because it impacts the supplier that's closest to you. I'll leave you with a slide that discusses resiliency and agility and global network design in just a couple of minutes, so I won't go cover that quite yet. But a lot of companies now are kind of shifting all this around and looking at agility as a possible answer to where they go next. And so it's really just a company's ability to quickly adjust your tactics of your supply chain operation within your supply chain. And some of those dimensions are the ability to understand what's happening, react, make a decision, implement, and then modify the range of tactics and operations that you might need, which shows itself as flexibility in your operation. So here's a really messy slide. And I'm not going to go through this, but I want to leave this with you as you and your leadership teams look at what are the things that you might do in each of these areas to help you be more agile and to recover from some of the impacts that you're seeing. Some people may have to look at their customer base and say, we have to either respond to a segment of that customer base differently, or maybe there's some customers we need to walk away from because we can no longer deliver the kind of service that customer provides. So look through this, look for opportunities to discuss and think about ways that you can change as a business to become more agile. So what's next? Everyone says, how long is this going to last? When's it going to get better? I'd say the answer depends on if there's another new COVID variant around the corner, because what we've seen looking backwards is it takes about 4 to 6 months for the supply chain to register the cause of it and understand how that variant is going to affect the supply chain. Absent any more variants, I would say it's 4 to 6 months to dig out from the most recent one. Some other areas you can look at is your approach to labor, both hourly and salaried. Your transportation strategy may have to change. Instead of maybe working with a broker, maybe it's time to start working on a contractual basis and have a deeper relationship with just a few carriers. You might need to apply automation differently depending upon what's right for your business, and certainly apply risk and understand those impacts to your business.
Hey, John,
Yes.
before you move on too much further, we did have a question come in around the few slides ago on your port slide, and the question was around I think the number that I saw was 328 was the world rank for Los Angeles, and the question was, could you define how the ports were scored and what drove LA to be so low? Was it efficiency, volume, or potentially other?
Yeah, that's a great question. This is a pretty complex index, and it looks at a number of factors. Productivity is one, capital utilization is another, capacity is another. I can, after we're done here, I can go back and actually get you the larger document this came from. If someone wants to dig into that and look a little more granularity, I can certainly provide that to you.
Great, thank you, John.
So I'm just going to finish up and invite any remaining questions that you might have. The white paper library is available to you at the link shown. There's a larger bit of information at our overall website, which is the Global Supply Chain Institute. And if I can help any of you on an individual basis, my email address is there, and I'd be happy to take emails and respond to you one-on-one. John, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Okay, great. I have a few questions, but we did just have one other question come in. And I think this question, it may not necessarily be just to you, John. This may be a question for you and the larger audience. And it's around the loss of labor or a solution to the labor force. And the question is, do we know where all these people went and why they're not working? I'm kind of curious, John, maybe what your thoughts are on the kind of like the great retirement or the early retirement, all the folks who left and never came back. But yeah, so the question is, does anyone know where all these people went and why they're not working? And are those reasons the same for the US around the world?
Well, I'll take a shot at some of the things that we've seen, John, and I'll throw a few ideas out. I mean, pay is where everyone goes immediately. And what we're finding is it's not necessarily pay, although it's certainly a factor. What we're seeing more of is the specification for an individual to work and to be productive in a given environment is changing. And that's a lot of inputs on how are my kids being schooled now? Are they at home or are they back in the classroom or something different, some other hybrid? Because that changes how a parent then is able to deploy themselves to work. So that specification involves children. It can involve maybe folks that you're providing care to in your family, maybe elder care. And it also is starting to take into consideration flexibility. People, the genie's out of the bottle, okay? And so people have gotten used in some cases to being able to work from home, and they like it, and they've built their lives around that. So that might prevent them from going back to whatever the traditional, go to work model was. In your world, I mean, I'm sure you've got skilled labor needs that are being unmet, and that skilled labor can't work from home. It's got to be on site. So all of these factors are playing into how they're available now for work, and it's changing, including, as you mentioned, John, the great retirement. Are there other folks that can chime in on this?
Sorry, I'm just giving a pause to see if anybody wanted to give any insight into that. I'll keep an eye out for that. Maybe just to piggyback onto that question, John, one of the questions that I had related to labor is how do you see companies kind of dealing with the shortage of skilled and professional labor availability?
That's another great question. We work with hundreds of companies, global companies, so it's not just a US phenomenon, that are struggling with this right now. Pay is certainly an issue, and those companies that recruit on campus are certainly having to pay more for entry-level talent, like 10 to 15% more, and they're having to pay more for experienced talent as well. No, I would say no particular industry really has this figured out. Everybody to some extent is making it up as they go along, but they're having to reach out further for labor that might have been in their backyard before. They're having to pay more. They're having to be more flexible. They're having to offer benefits that they might not have considered offering before. But it seems to be a global phenomenon. We're not just seeing it in the US.
To follow up on another one of your points that you made, and it was similar to the port issue, but really just around freight markets in general. Our industry certainly has not been immune to this. I mean, freight costs have, in many cases, doubled in 12 to 18 months. What do you see happening in those freight markets as it relates to capacity and cost?
So almost irrespective of the mode, whether it's ocean, air, intermodal, motor freight, we're seeing a lot of volatility. We're seeing a lot of impact on not just cost, but capacity and service as well. And I think one of the core issues is the input costs to what you're paying in freight rates. So for almost any carrier, the two main inputs are always fuel and labor. And sometimes it's labor, then fuel, depending upon what's happening with fuel price. But diesel, great example. I mean, it's gone up. I wouldn't be surprised if like labor and fuel are neck and neck right now. And so both of those are under pressure. All of the other input costs that go into that are under pressure as well, because carriers obviously have to buy all the materials, tires, engines that they use. So I don't see anything happening quickly in terms of a reversal in freight markets, no matter which one you're operating in. And I would say short of a worldwide recession, I don't see anything that says all of a sudden freight's going to go back to normal again. I think it's probably going to stay elevated for an extended period of time.
We've had another question or two come in. First one is very specific to our industry. Our industry has had a shortage of motors, hoist motors, power, and of such. And the question is around, can you opine on how the limited supply of rare earth minerals will affect the supply of the increased demand for AC motors and battery power supplies?
Not an area of specialty for me, but the same things that are at work in the freight markets are at work in some of those markets where you need specialty materials. And again, I still see upward pressure on that. And so again, short of a worldwide recession, I don't see a lot of relief there.
Another one on the freight topic. Question is, you mentioned freight brokers versus dedicated contracts with freight companies. Other than having a more meaningful and deeper relationship, what are the other benefits of contracting with an actual freight carrier?
It's a good question. In all of my work history, I used brokerage services very, very sparingly. So most of my experiences is with contracted freight with major truckload carriers. I think there's a lot of benefits that start to come to you once you establish those longer term relationships. Yes, you get some contractual rates that might or might not be met. Yes, you get some capacity commitments in certain lanes. But as you get to know that carrier and that carrier starts to know your network and your pickup points and your destination points, they really start to learn about what's required to operate in a given lane in either direction. Am I going to be facing a live unload situation? Do I get to do drop and hook in this situation? There's a lot of learning that goes along with that. And when companies use exclusively brokers or are continuously changing the network analysis and bringing new carriers into their network, you never really get a chance to learn those nodes and those lanes very well, so that you're always sort of waking up to a new surprise. That's why we tended to use the same carriers kind of over and over again, and we didn't very often put our business out for bid because we didn't want to upset the learning that we'd done over many, many years.
Next question is around the differences between large, completely vertically integrated companies versus smaller companies. And it's, do the independent variables you put forth as affecting the supply chain affect larger global companies differently than the smaller independent companies?
I think the answer is the effects are the same, but the way the larger companies deal with them tend to be very different. And we'll use the 800-pound gorilla, the Amazon, as an example. When Amazon started getting shut out of the ports that they needed to use, and the carriers lacked the capacity to provide what they needed, they had a lot of options open to them, like using their own air fleet, chartering aircraft, chartering ocean freighters to do what they need to do, or to go to different ports. So it gives you a wider range of options when you're vertically integrated and you control more of the supply chain. The reality is, though, if labor's not available, no matter what the cost, and if diesel fuel or bunker fuel isn't available, you're still going to be constrained just the same way a company that's not vertically integrated.
Next question was, how much negative impact have new government regulations aggravated the supply chain issue? And is there any chance they may lessen some of these regulations, like allowing longer driving days and maybe using non-union labor in union sectors?
Yeah, that's a big question. I mean, the most the most terrifying words I think I've ever heard is, "Hi, I'm from the government and I'm here to help." So one of the things that I think government could actually do to help is to start accelerating how we allow commercial truck drivers to operate on the highway. I mean, hours of service was certainly an impact a number of years ago that effectively took capacity out of the market. But there is some legislation afoot to put 18-year-olds behind the wheel, which is a scary thought, but we got to get capacity from somewhere. There's also some thought that we could employ non-Americans in some of those roles and offer work visas for people to come into the country with those driving skills that we need badly. But in general, I don't see anything happening quickly with government regulation, but I'd certainly be open to help in either one of those two areas as it impacts the freight industry.
Okay, we still have about, I don't know, 15 minutes or left or so. I do have one other question, and I guess we'll see if any other questions come in. And if not, maybe we'll give everybody a few minutes back. But my final question is, based around everything we just covered, I'm going to ask you to look into your crystal ball. And, when do you think that the supply chains will return to normal, or at least whatever that new normal is?
So I'll pull out my crystal ball. Looks like a snow globe at this point. But absent any more variants coming our way, any more shutdowns due to the pandemic, I mean, things start to return to normal in about 6 months. Now, normal doesn't mean that prices revert back to what they were before. I think inflation's done its damage. I think that's going to be with us for a while, and it might slowly recede, but I don't see anything snapping it back really quickly. Most supply chains now are focused on resiliency and agility. So well, not everyone, but I think a lot of companies have learned their lesson that the relentless focus on efficiency and cost has led them down a path that's a long way from agility and resiliency. So all those supply chains are now kind of standing at attention and going, what do I have to do to my supply chain? And what capital investment do I need to make that will help me be more and more agile and be able to respond more quickly to my customers' needs? And I think that is a good thing. I think the other thing that's happened that's been a good thing as well is companies are really looking hard at risk management and saying, I'm not sure I want my supply chain to extend halfway around the world and back again, because that's not real agile. If I have to wait for a ship to go over and manufacture something and bring it back, I can't respond very quickly at all. I don't know if I captured all the elements of your question, John, but those are a few of my initial thoughts.
No, you did. Thank you. And we had one other question come in while you were answering that one, and I'll go ahead and ask that now. And it is, do you feel that immigration done properly could help many of the labor shortages that we're seeing?
I think it certainly could, because clearly we have a greater need for labor than we're able to supply internally. And to me, that is one of those areas where a bipartisan approach could really help us with the specific skills that we need. I mean, it's not only truck drivers, there's a lot of other skills that we can employ in this country, things that would help your industry a lot too. And that's an area where government could certainly help, as well as providing the necessary tax credits for training those folks if they need supplemental training to become more competent here in the United States.
Okay, well, in the absence of any other questions at the moment, I just want to say thank you, John, for sharing those insights of yours. It's been fantastic and very generous of you to share your expertise with us and our industry, and particularly how constrained we're all feeling, and being able to maintain our own inventories, keep our relationships strong with our customers. It's been extremely valuable. So
Sure.
I appreciate that.
A couple of years.
Yeah. So I guess we'll give everybody a few minutes back of their day, but I'm going to wrap about 10 minutes early here. I'm going to go ahead and say we've come to the end of this town hall event. Certainly appreciate everyone that joined us today. Again, John, thank you for your expertise. And we will be holding one more town hall event like this one later in 2022. So look for that announcement soon. Thanks to everyone for coming, and we will hopefully see many of you in Louisville.
All right. So long, everyone.